Okay, welcome back after a slight hiatus. Back to some Blood Bayonets, how to play, how to use the different factions in the game, and how everything works. I started a new job, and they kind of wanted me to go to work every day. So I was in like a training phase, and that kind of limited my ability to make videos and stuff. But now I'm past that, and so I have a little bit more free time to make some videos. So I'm going to pick back up on the how to play part of my series of videos with Blood Bayonets, and we're going to be talking about Cav. What I put out here in front of the camera is just kind of a basic grouping of some of the Cav I have. To here you have French lights, which are chasseurs à cheval, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. And they have an officer and a musician. In the middle, I have some French or Polish lancers with a musician and a officer in there. He's in there somewhere. Where's the officer? I don't know. He's hiding in there. I know that he's in there. Oh, he's right here. In the back, we have some French heavy cavalry, some cuirassiers. And over here on the left, you have some British light dragoons. Obviously, I have more British types of cavalry, but just for kind of a talk through of how Cav works in the game, I just pulled some Brits out to kind of give you an idea how they interact with other cavalry. If you notice, I have them in 2 lines deep. The rule is as you lose take casualties in the game, you're supposed to try to even up your lines as much as possible. This is sort of representative of how Cav works, but you want to see I went from 8 to 6 there. So you want to try to keep each line as even as possible. The reason that is Cav they do have a flank and they do have an arc. So in order for them to charge anything, they got to be within that 180 arc in the front. And if anybody attacks them and they're completely behind this first row, as if you drew a tape measure, if the attack comes completely from behind this first row, it would be a flank rear charge, which will give you extra dice on the attack, and I'll explain that all in a second. So that being said, so you can't, the goal is to avoid a scenario like this, where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1 in the back. That widens your footprint on the table too much, and it also inherently makes it harder for you to maneuver, plus it kind of detracts from how the game's designed. As your unit gets smaller, you should compress it down. It's just like line units. When they take damage, it should be pulled from the ends, not to break a single line, but to keep it as balanced as possible. Cav units go from 4 models all the way up to 12. Obviously, you pay more points for the higher models. The higher model counts. Having 4 Cav can be effective. Honestly, I think 6 to 8 is probably the butter zone. 12 if you want to get real adventurous. But you could try it with 4. It's just units that small become very fragile when they take damage. But conversely, if you could get around the flanks or the rear of an opponent, they can be menacing, constantly in the background. So a couple other things about Cav. They all had some kind of musketoons, or firearms, long-range firearms in this period, but they weren't that effective. Would they shoot off a horseback? Conceivably, very rarely. But that being said, you can dismount any Cav unit. When they dismount, they become more like infantry units. Their shooting becomes a little better because now they're walking around on foot, not trying to shoot off the back of a horse. But they lose all their special bonuses for cavalry, so for being Cav. So it's your choice. You might want to, hey, I want to dismount my guys and get them in a building or hold an objective or something like that. But once they dismount, they're dismounted for the game. You can't remount later in the game. That dismount action is free, so you could literally ride up and just get off and, hey, we're dismounted. You have to have the models for it, though. So I know there's a lot of Dragoon models out there, especially French Dragoons. You can, use them dismounted, and then and there's a couple other I've seen floating around. But finding dismounted like heavy cuirassier models would be probably a little challenging. I don't know if they exist. I don't think I've ever seen them. But that being said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over how we get movement in the game and how Cav moves, and make sure everybody's on the same page and understand how they move, and then we'll get into how they do melee combat. Okay, let's get into movement and how Cav moves in the game. Whenever you activate a unit of Cav, whether they're light, heavy, medium, it doesn't matter, as long as they have the Cavalry keyword. Whenever they're activated, they get a free 4-inch move before they do anything else. So say, for instance, you activated this group with a heart. So they're trained, they're gonna get 2 actions. So before you do anything, they get their 4-inch free movement. So this is free, meaning it doesn't count against any of their actions, doesn't count against any of their limitations, like say if they had 2 fatigue on them or something, they're -1 action. Now they've done their free movement. Now it's like you start the turn with your 2 actions, because we played it with a heart. They have 2 more actions, which they can move 2 more times, moving a total of 12 inches. They could, I don't know, reload, conceivably charge, whatever you want to do with them. That being said, but say if I had played these guys with a spade, right? So now technically they would have, after they move their free movement, they would have 3 more potential move actions, because you played them, I'm sorry, not with a spade, with a club. I'm thinking backwards. So you played them with a club, so now you have 3 more actions. So say you use your first 2 actions to move. So you move 4 inches of 4 inches for 1 action, 1 action. Now you're up to 8. If you move again, if you go beyond that 8 inches, they'll gain a fatigue. Even though they've moved 12 total because of the 4 inches of free movement, it's like that free movement happens before they even start their turn. And now if you move them more than 8, just like infantry, they'll gain a fatigue. So that means you could move this unit 16 inches for free, then 3 movements of 4. But at the end of that movement, you would gain a fatigue at the end of that movement. So that's basically how they move. One other thing is they do have an arc, which I'm going to reiterate again. It's you basically divide these guys down the middle. Anything in that 180 arc out the front, they could see, they could attack, they could shoot at. They cannot charge backwards. When we were playtesting, I want to try to make the arcs and stuff not very fiddly, and creating arguments with like, oh, are you an arc or aren't you an arc? But I found it felt wrong that they could charge a defensive fire backwards. Unlike infantry on foot in skirmish or loose formation, which do not have arcs, they're 360. It seems much more plausible that they could shoot in in any direction, where cavalry would have to turn around. One thing I did bring up, if you want to like turn them, as they say, wheeling, that's fine. It's kind of a free movement, as long as you don't move anybody more than 4 inches in the turn. So these guys on the outside would obviously be moving the furthest. Can you move, sideways? Sure. You can, flow around. That's fine. I want to make it where they can flow relatively easily around, and you're not being super constrained with movement. Remember, the scale of this game is pretty small, so these are small units. You're not trying to maneuver big giant regiments to stuff around and trying to fit them into places. So I want to make sure players can move around, relatively freely. That being said, there are some limitations to the movement of cavalry. Cav cannot move into the woods. So if you had a bunch of infantry loose, because infantry can't be in formations in the woods, in the woods, they would be pretty safe from charges of Cav. They wouldn't be as safe. Obviously they could still be shot and stuff like that, and they can't form formations in the wood. And needless to say, you can't bring your horse in a house, and you can't bring your horse on a boat, which I assume most people would that would seem very reasonable to them. But I got to make sure that's in the rules and people understand it. So the next thing I want to go over is how squares are formed in reaction to cav, and also how they work on the charge. So we're going to get into that right now. Okay, the scenario I have here is I have a unit of English line facing off against a unit of 6 French heavies, cuirassiers. So the English line in this scenario is unloaded. They see the French cavalry coming at them, potentially molesting them. If you notice, the French do not have a commander, do not have a musician or anything. They're just 6 troopers. So the way it would work is, say you activate the French line with a heart. So the first thing the French do is they get their free 4-inch movement, which they always get free 4-inch movement, right? And so now they've landed within 8 inches of the English unit, but there should be still outside of 4. They were 9 inches away. So I'm the French player. I've moved my cavalry within 8 inches of a line unit in line, not a unit like in loose or skirmish formation. And I would say to the English player, would you like to try to attempt to form square? You can always form square in your own turn. If you feel like the enemy's going to come at you with a bunch of horses, a bunch of mounted troopers. But you can form square as a reaction. So why would the English player want to form square? Well, one, he's unloaded. So if he gets charged now, he would not be able to defensive fire and potentially stop the charge. Also, when he forms square, he can defensive melee. That means the Cav comes into base contact, and then the English get to fight first, basically, is what that means. So they could get a fight first, which conceivably could make the French run away. So in this scenario, the French player says, hey, would you like to form square? The English player says, no, I don't want to. I want to see what you do with your cavalry. So we have 2 actions left. Remember, the first one was free. So the second one, he moves right within basically an inch now of the English, because this is his first action. He didn't have enough to make the charge, but he had enough to come up here and scare him some more. So now the English player says, all right, it looks like the French have committed. I'm going to try to form square. So he would look at his resolve, which is a resolve is a 6. No commanders near him, no support. So he'd roll 1 dice. He gets an 8. So he's able to form square. So you simply do not move them forward, but you could turn the sides and create a square formation just outside of that inch. I got a little closer because it was for the camera to make sure everything's fixed. Because he's English do not gain a fatigue when forming a square as a defensive reaction or defensive fire. As a defensive reaction, all other countries would gain a fatigue at this point. So now the French players, they have 1 more action to go, and they say, ooh, this doesn't look good. Like, I don't want to charge that because it's too advantageous for the English. So he decides for his next action to just move away. So now, what would be the benefit of coming up with your cav and then forcing your opponent to form a square and not actually charging home? Well, say the French had a cannon that had a good shot at this now, that hadn't fired this turn or hadn't activated this turn. So you could take that shot, with a cannon, and which would add extra potential damage to the square. Or the other thing is, now when the English player does actually activate this unit, he has to waste an action getting them out of square, because while you're in square, you can't move. You only can do half shots, like out of one side. You can't do double half shots, but you can only do half shots. And you're more vulnerable to artillery fire. So let's run a slightly different scenario now. So say these guys are coming in. The English have decided to try to form square. They fail to form square because, remember, so the French player has ended here. He hasn't declared a charge yet, but he ended there. So now the English roll, he failed. He needs to get a 6 or better, but because they have a musician, they get to re-roll all resolves, and we'll say he failed the second time. So now they failed to form square, and the French player says, yeah, I'm going to charge this. So the French player would charge in. The English player was unloaded, so he had no ability to stop the charge, stop the defensive fire, sorry. So how do we figure out what happens here? So now the French player has charged home. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. Because they're heavies, you add 4 attack dice to that. So he would roll 10 dice, needing 6s, and then the English player would save on 7s. If with the attack dice added onto it, obviously, you could buff that up to, the heavies have 4. Sorry, this is what I was trying to say. Okay, let's do a different scenario. The French have come in. The English have decided to try to form square because they ended their movement within 8 inches. The English fail. Let's see if it'll fail. So they rolled a 5, but then they get a re-roll because they have a drummer, and the re-roll fails. So they 5 and a 4. They all fail. So the French player decides, I'm going to drive the charge home. They come in. The way we would calculate dice in this scenario is you have 6 French heavies, and for heavies you add 4 more. So they would use 10 attack dice. For mediums, you'd add 3 more, which would be like dragoons and lancers and such. It's all listed in their unit description. So if these were mediums, it would be 9 attack dice. And if they're lights, it's adding plus 2 more. So lights would be 6 plus 2. You'd have 8 attack dice. So we fight our round of melee combat, and because it's cav versus infantry, all cavalry versus infantry, when you finish your round of combat, you can move. You get a free movement away, so they can move away. So now they've attacked the English line, they beat them up, they killed some guys, and they moved away. One thing that allows other units to come in and attack them. It allows the English line to be shot. That being said, if the English line had fallen back, the French could have stayed in contact with them. You don't have to move away. Why would you ever want to stay in contact? Well, no one can fire or use a shoot action into an active melee, like a swirling melee. So it kind of protects your troops a little bit from being shot. Now, that being said, they're tied down though, for future rounds of melee. So say they did stay locked in, like they didn't want to pull away. If we get to another turn, or later in the turn, their commander tells them to fight again, they would only fight with 6 attack dice. Those impact attacks, the 4 for heavies, 3 for mediums, 2 for lights, only happen on the charge. They don't happen in subsequent rounds of melee. So one other thing too another scenario that can happen is, say you only had 3 French heavies coming into contact in a charge. Normally, heavies give you 4 extra attack dice. But in this scenario, you can never have more of those impact dice, they're called impact dice, than you can guys in the unit for the charge. You could get them in other scenarios, and I'll explain that in a second. So in this scenario right here, you would have 3 attack dice for these guys, 3 melee dice, plus 3 more, even though they're heavies, which they normally get 4, but you only have 3 guys. You can't get higher. It seems very strange if you had one guy charge, and then he gets 4 impact dice. It doesn't seem right or make any sense. So in this scenario, one guy charges, he would roll 2 attack dice, 2 melee dice, 1 for himself and 1 for the impact. All right, I'm going to go over how it works with flank charges, and also how it works with running down guys in the open, like guys in loose forming. Okay, the English in this scenario have got themselves in a little bit of a pickle. We have some, let me slide this up a little bit so you can see it more clearly. We have some French lights that have gotten around behind them. If you draw a line in front of that first row of the target unit, they would not be able to, the French are completely behind that line, so the French would gain extra impact dice or extra attack dice because they're hitting them in the flank. Flank or rear. I don't have them specific, like, is it the rear, is it the flank? It's just, overall, it's bad. In this scenario, the English have failed to form square. They could form square here because they just have 8 guys. That's the bare minimum you'd need to form a square. Remember, infantry formations drop out of a formation when they get below 8. So in order to form line or attack column or any of that, you need at least 8. So in this scenario here, the French have finished up their movement. The next, they have one more action. They're going to charge. They're going to come in like this. So they gain 4 attack dice, 1 for each, or melee dice, 1 for each guy. They gain 2 more because they're lights, so now we're up to 6, plus 3 more because they're hitting them in the flank / rear. So that'd be 9 attack dice. Looking for 6s in this scenario, and these guys would be saving on 7s, which could be pretty devastating. I'm going to pause now, and then one other thing, once that melee is over, these guys could move away if they want, because it's always cav versus guys on foot. Cav can always pull away if they want to. So let me get into what happens when they get guys that are in loose formation, or they can't or skirmish. Okay, we have some British skirmishers. They're a flank company. They all have 360-degree arcs of fire, so they don't have flanks per se, but they're in loose formation, and loose formations are much more susceptible to being charged by mounted troopers on horses. So, the idea of a bunch of hussars running down fleeing infantry was a real thing that actually happened. And when infantry start to run, or they're in a more loose open formation, they're much more susceptible to cav. So in this scenario here, we'll assume that the British are unloaded. If they were loaded, they could defensive fire just like anybody else. They're unloaded. The cav basically got them with their pants down. They hit them, boom. So we figure out our target number. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to have 4 melee dice, plus 2 more because they're light cavalry, which gets to 6, plus 3 more, which is 9 because these guys are loose. Whenever you run down guys that are loose, you gain 3 extra, impact hits or attack dice. In this scenario, though, so it's basically, if you're hitting guys loose or skirmish formation, it both counts the same for this, or guys in the rear or flank, you're going to get those 3 extra dice. So here's one scenario that I want to make sure people understand how this works. So we have, say they just get charged by one heavy cuirassier, one heavy Frenchman, right? One heavy French cavalry, sorry. He normally gets his 1 attack. Because he's a heavy, they get 4 impact hits, but in this scenario, he'd only get 1 extra impact hit because he's just 1 guy. But you always get the extra 3 for running down guys in loose, or hitting someone in the flank. So even though it's just 1 guy attacking, You get the one attack for one dice for him himself, one for impact instead of 4 because there's only one of them, and then 3 extra for running down guys in loose formation. So in this scenario, you'd actually be attacking with 5. You'd be rolling 5 dice on them. It just shows to represent how vulnerable infantry are in the open, in loose formation against Cav. This would be very terrifying for these guys. You could see them just running away. That's what it's supposed to represent. So I want to make sure that players understand that even though it's just one guy, you can actually put out some damage. But having just a one-man unit, they're very fragile. Obviously, if they die, they're gone, or if they get 2 or more fatigue, they're gone. One other thing I want to go over is how cavalry interact with each other when they fight. So hold on, we're going to skip to that. Okay, what we have here is some cheeky Brits have charged the French heavies. So they come on in, they charge the French heavies. They have the British have 8 troopers plus 2 because they're light. They're considered light, so that'd be 10 attack dice. They'd fight their round of melee, and because it's light cavalry going against either heavies or medium cavalry, the Brits can actually disengage from the Cav. But light cavalry engaging light cavalry, they're locked in. No disengaging. So lights can basically get away from everything. Lights can get away from medium and heavy Cav. So that way they're more, it's to represent them being much more nimble on the battlefield and being able to disengage and work around the flanks and such in such scenarios like that. There's one other thing I want to bring up. I want to talk about Lancers and some of their special rules, and I think that should wrap up the way Cav works. So let me pause and we'll set that up so you guys can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, in this scenario, the French Lancers, the Polish Lancers have charged home against a Brits in square. So why would Lancers want to do that? Or why would you want to charge a square? So normally when you charge a square, you'll get a defensive melee fight if you haven't done a shoot action. That basically means they'll be able to fight first before the Cav. But because you have the lances are longer than bayonets, that negates that ability. They will not get a defensive melee attack. Some of the few squares that were actually broken in the Napoleonic Wars were broken by Lancers. It was pretty rare for anybody to break a square, but the Lancers potentially had a better shot at it. That could be a little anecdotal, but there were some instances where it happened. But the Brits are still in a pretty good position because by being in square, they negate all impact hits from attacking cavalry. Also, they have no flank. There is no flanks for a square, so they can't get flank charged. They lose impact hits. So in this scenario, you have 8 Lancers. They would just roll 8 attack dice. Versus if they were not in square, they would be rolling 8 plus 3, 11 attack dice. And if they could get them into the flank, you're talking 11 plus 3, 14 attack dice. So it could get really nasty if you get them in the right position. So being in square does give you a lot of benefits. Against guys cavalry, they lose all those impact hits and all that kind of stuff. So say the same scenario, say the French heavies decided to charge the square. Now they do not have that extended lance, for that initial charge. And a lot of time the Lancers, the first rank would have lances, the later ranks wouldn't even have lances. So in this scenario, the British would able to defensive fight. So they're going to do a melee attack against the French before the French get to fight. So say they kill 3 of them, and then they fail miserably all their resolve rolls, they could potentially run away. So say they survive the resolve rolls. So now they have no impact attacks because you lose that against going against a square, and there's no flanks, so you're just rolling 3 attack dice in this scenario. So it can be very, you know, potentially could save a unit from, you know, cav attacking, you know, in a square. One of the negatives is, and I've used this in games where I'll roll in with a big unit of cav, scare my opponent into forming a whole bunch of squares, and then just ride away. So now he's got a bunch of units in square formation. Potentially, they've gained fatigue because they form squares out of action, you know, out in your opponent's action. And now I've just ridden away with my cav. But that's what they would do a lot. You know, they would use the cav to molest, to, you know, make you think about it, get around the flanks. And some of the battle reports, you could see how I use cav like that. I got around, you know, into the rear of my opponent, and now he's worried about this group of cav running around in the background, and what do I do, and how do I react to it? And it takes your opponent off his game because, or her game, because now they're focused on your, you know, your 6 light cavalry running around in the background, and they're not focused on the objective. I'm going to wrap up with one more thing, and then we'll wrap it up. I think I got a good explanation on how all the you know, mounted troops work in Blood. Okay, I just want to go over some kind of overviews of it. A couple other things, make sure everybody understands. The size of the bases are 25 by 50. I'm using the pill size shaped bases, but you don't have to. You could use the squared off ones. It's fine. The size of the units are 4 to 12. All the cav units go 4 to 12. We go over some of the manufacturers I have here, like the French heavies over here, Perry Brothers miniatures. The British Light Dragoons back here are Perry's. These guys up here, the French Chasseurs à Cheval, are Piano War Games 3D prints that I 3D printed. And these guys over here, the Polish Lancers, are Vitrix. One other thing I want to talk about is you can build an all cav army in this game. There's 3 types of commanders you can take. You can take like a field commander or a foot commander, which would be, you know, commanding troops, you know, foot soldiers. That's kind of probably the most common commander you'll see in the game. And then you'll have a cav commander. It can get kind of expensive in the sense that your command unit has to be mounted, and so that's going to cost more points than a guy that, you know, like a foot guy. And also all your units, they don't have to all be cav, but cav become core, and you could take support units and stuff like that, like a cannon or something like that. But the majority of your force will be cav because, you know, you need one core for each support force. So you could take an all cavalry force. It's just going to be, I mean, it could be fun to play with, but it's just a little more inherently fragile in the sense that you're going to have a lot less guys because your biggest unit is 12, and the individual troopers cost more points than an individual guy on foot. Unless you wanted to go, I guess Spanish and all inexperienced cav force would be kind of interesting because the points are relatively low. But now you have a whole force of inexperienced cavalry that really save poorly and have really bad morale. But that's your choice. You could try it out. Eventually, I'm building up to get enough cav to make an all four, you know, cav force. In play testing, we play tested smaller cav forces or cavalry forces, but I want to get to that 250 points. I found that through play testing, 250 is a good kind of butter zone for playing games. It allows you to bring some kind of cool stuff. You're not so limited, like you can't bring any elites, but you're rocking about 5 to 7 units total, you know, so that seems like a kind of good place to be. The games last about, you know, an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on your, you know, knowledge and abilities. So you could play a fun game in an afternoon or an evening with that 250 point kind of target zone. So that's what we found that's, you know, plays pretty well. And we play it on a 4x3, the 250 points. If you wanted to play a little smaller, you could go smaller, as small as 100 points and play on a 3x3 or 150 or even 200 points on a 3x3. But that being said, you know, your forces are going to be a little more limited because you don't have as many points to play around with. And also, you're probably not going to have 16-man line units. You just don't have the points to do it. But you could go smaller. You could try it out, or you could go for an all, guerrilla type force where there are no formations. It's just groups of guys running around and sniping and hiding in the bushes and stuff. So that being said, this is what I got for kind of an idea of how cavalry works in the game. I'm currently painting some more Vitrix Hussars, cavalry Hussars. I want to try to bulk up my cavalry force to make it like a big giant, because I think they look cool, because I like the uniforms. But that's being said, I'm going to do some more battle reports, and I'm going to also start getting into some of the other games, some Blood and Valor stuff. I know some people have been asking about that. That's another game I wrote. And some other games and hobby stuff that I'm interested in. Eventually, I want to set up to show how I paint, because all the stuff I painted, and I painted most of the models in the Blood and Plunder and, the Blood and series books. Most of them, not all of them, obviously. I didn't paint everything, but I painted a good chunk of them. So that being said, hopefully I'll, be able to get a new video out here pretty quickly, and I appreciate you watching. Please leave in the comments. Blood and Bayonets is still on backer kit right now. You can pre-order it. So you haven't missed the boat per se, if you're interested in getting into the game. And please let your friends know about it and check it out.